I recognize the member from Fredericton South and leader of his party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise on this amendment following the member from Bathurst West, Beresford, beautiful part of the province, Madam Speaker. I've been there many times. There's nothing like the sun coming up over Bathurst Harbour. It's just the most incredible thing to see when you wake up in the morning. So, Madam Speaker, I'm impressed by this reasoned amendment because of the rationale that's contained in it, that the House declined to give second reading to Bill 35, an act respecting and empowering the school system, as it presents our risk to children, which is contrary to good public policy. Very clear, very true, from everything that I have heard from all of the organizations representing professionals in the field on this, and it's heartfelt, Madam Speaker. My cow manure detector is pretty good, and this number of emails I've had from psychologists, from their organizations, from learning disability specialists, and from parents are heartfelt. There's no trying to advance an agenda here. It's about doing what's right for students, implementing what is good policy, and this is not good policy. I'm the kind of guy who likes to go to the ground and see what's happening, what people's experience has been, Madam Speaker. And I had this email from a New Brunswick mother who I asked permission to share, Madam Speaker, because it relates an experience that is so pertinent to this debate that it's important to be on the record. And she starts with, "I apologize for this long email," not as long as many that sometimes we see, but that's what she says. "I'm absolutely appalled that Bill 35 is even being considered as a viable solution for children who are unable to receive timely psychoeducational assessment from a licensed psychologist due to their socioeconomic background and are at the mercy of the system. I'm not sure how else I can bring attention to Bill 35 that's being brought to the table. I've yet to speak to anybody who thinks it's a good solution. Dangerous is the most commonly used adjective. I urge you to stop and educate yourself about the very real implications Bill 35 will have on our children's future." Dominic Carty has said, that's what it says in the email, Madam Speaker, has said that a psychoeducational assessment performed by a private psychologist costs about $7,000. This is absolutely false. Most cost between $2,000 to $3,000. They also provide you with a complete learning profile, meaning outlining strengths and weaknesses, and how to best teach and support the child. A research teacher with 1,000 hours of training cannot possibly provide a complete learning profile. Not only are they currently understaffed and unable to provide supports for the students that they already have, but they do not have the education or time to provide 20 to 30 hours per child to provide a complete assessment and diagnosis. This is beyond dangerous. This is not in any child's best interest. We cannot allow Bill 35 to be passed. This bill may not affect my child, but it will affect others. I'm not willing to stand by silently while government condemns even one child to a misdiagnosis that can have a very real impact on their education, post-secondary education, and future jobs. Every child has the right to learn, and this can be done by providing the proper diagnosis and accommodations. If our education system adopted an RTI, structured literacy, explicit and multisensory method, it would benefit all children, not just those with learning disabilities. The changes that Bill 35 would make will further the divide between at-risk, low-income, and kids with uninvolved parents versus those children who are able to obtain a private psychoeducational assessment by a licensed psychologist. I have an 11-year-old son who is dyslexic. When my son was in grade 2, we really knew something wasn't quite right. He was such a bright kid that could remember the most minute details from something months ago, but couldn't remember that what was not HWHAT from one sentence to the next. His reading fluence was horrendous, but yet, if you read a book to him once, he could repeat it from memory, with all the inflection and emphasis that he heard when we read it to him. My son went through some testing at school performed by a resource teacher to see if he might be dyslexic. Meanwhile, my family doctor suggested trying out a speech-language pathologist to see if she could guide us onto the right path with some testing to see if she thought there was a language disorder. I also booked in an appointment with a psychologist that primarily works with people with learning disabilities. The resource teacher called me in for a meeting with his teacher and her to discuss the results of her testing. I was told that my son is severely dyslexic, that would need intense tutoring at minimum of 2 hours a week all year long to be able to read, but he would never be able to spell and would likely struggle his whole life. She also told me that it would be impossible for him to learn another language. She then asked me if it was me or my husband who was dyslexic. I told her that neither of us are, but I do have a brother that is dyslexic. She looked me in the eye and told me that it is hereditary and she had never heard of dyslexia skipping a generation. I assured her that neither of us were dyslexic and that if we were, we would be honest about it. I left that meeting defeated, scared, and gutted. I broke down in my car at the thought of my son being so profoundly impacted that he would struggle for life. A short time later, the speech pathologist went over her findings with me. Yes, she thought there was a very real possibility that my son is dyslexic. However, he has some awesome strengths. At this point, we started the assessment process with a psychologist. She was able to look at the testing performed by the resource teacher and the speech-language pathologist, as well as her own testing, and form a complete diagnosis. When we met to discuss the results of her assessment, the first words out of her mouth were that she was so excited to give us the results because he was one smart kid with some awesome strengths. What? He's not doomed for a life of struggle and failure? Please tell me more. When I explained to the psychologist my experience with the resource teacher, she was careful with the words not to disparage the teacher, but she made it very clear that not only was she overstepping, but also it was dangerous. That is why I'm so against Bill 35. My son is fortunate that we were able to provide him with the opportunity to receive the proper testing and diagnosis and didn't have to rely solely on the resource teacher's results. We would not have known about his full learning profile. We also would not have been given hope that the proper guidance on how to help him succeed could be done. It's crucial for all kids to be diagnosed properly and accurately. I believe Bill 35 will only further the divide between the kids whom cannot have an assessment performed privately versus the ones who can. You need to know their weaknesses, but you also must know their strengths. My son went into French immersion in grade 3. He's now in grade 6 and he's thriving. He loves school. I hope my perspective and experience with the resource teacher performed assessment helps inform people about the risks of Bill 35. My son's lucky. We were able to provide him with a proper assessment so he was properly diagnosed. Many children do not have that privilege. Our children deserve better from the government. We need to allow the professional psychologists to do their work and allow teachers to do theirs. There is no greater resource than our children. They are the future of New Brunswick. Please help fight Bill 35 so that we can do better by them. I beg you. I do hope you're willing and able to add your voice to the fight against Bill 35 for New Brunswick children's sake. And I asked her, of course, for permission to share that email, Madam Speaker, which she granted me. Madam Speaker, to me, that explains through direct experience what the issues are here. Some of the issues have been raised by College of Psychologists, by individual psychologists, by school psychologists, by the Association for Learning Disabilities. Madam Speaker, so this is a case that should inform how we vote on this bill and on this amendment which we're debating. And so, Madam Speaker, as this amendment points out that this presents a risk to children, which is contrary to good public policy, I agree. It does. As long as Section 11 stands as it is, it does, Madam Speaker, present a risk to children, and it's contrary to good public policy. So, Madam Speaker, I will support this amendment because it's clear. We don't want to risk the misdiagnosis of children. or end up in any of the other scenarios that countless psychologists have presented if this policy were implemented through legislation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.